नमस्कार दोस्तों, हर संडे की तरह आपके साथ जुड़ चुका हूँ। थोड़ी खांसी है। बाबा अमरनाथ के दर्शन करने के बाद श्रीनगर आया हूँ और आपके लिए आज का वीडियो पेश कर रहा हूँ। मुझे अच्छा लगता है जब आपसे पॉजिटिव रिएक्शंस आती हैं और मुझे उससे बहुत प्रोत्साहन मिलता है कि आई शुड कीप ऑन डूइंग वीडियोस फॉर द अर्बन कोऑपरेटिव बैंकर्स। टुडे आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट वन पर्टिकुलर सब्जेक्ट which was referred to me by a very senior banker, and veteran in banking. He has requested me to talk about the growth of urban cooperative banks and the commercial banks, rather a comparative picture. He wanted me to present before you. When I studied the topic, researched the topic, I found that basically many of the bankers or the consumers do not understand the difference between a commercial bank and a urban cooperative bank, and then they try to compare the urban cooperative banks with the commercial banks. Suffice it to say that commercial banks are normally where the government of India has a stake, or the commercial banks are also in a private sector like HDFC Bank, ICICI, Kotak. These are all theoretically called a commercial bank. The difference between the commercial bank and the cooperative bank lies in the basic fundamental principle that the commercial banks for all those years had a government stake in it. Now the stake has been reduced, but then these are all listed companies. When they are listed companies, the capital contribution of these banks is from the public as well as from the government. इसके सामने जो कोऑपरेटिव बैंक्स होती हैं, वो कोऑपरेटिव बैंक्स मेंबर्स उसका कैपिटल कंट्रीब्यूट करते हैं, उन्हें कोई सपोर्ट नहीं मिलता कहीं से. दे रन ऑन अ डेमोक्रेटिक प्रिंसिपल, फॉर द पीपल, बाय द पीपल, ऑफ द पीपल काइंड ऑफ थिंग. इसका मतलब ये है कि कुछ मेंबर्स इकट्ठे हो जाते हैं, मिनिमम कैपिटल कंट्रीब्यूट करते हैं, आरबीआई से लाइसेंस मिलता है, एंड देन दीज मेंबर्स रन दिस बैंक. These are typically registered under respective state government or respective state laws. Apart from this, as far as the banking is concerned, there is no difference. No difference in terms of banking is concerned, especially after the passage of Banking Regulation Act. The concept of dual control is gone. Earlier there were issues with the regulation, like the state registrars were issuing certain orders and the Reserve Bank of India was issuing orders, and both these regulatory bodies were directing the urban cooperative banks, and there was at times issues of clash of regulatory directives. Post September 2020, this has gone and the entire control is with Reserve Bank of India. As far as banking is concerned, for the first time the urban cooperative banks have been fully regulated by Reserve Bank of India, and you might be knowing that gradually the Reserve Bank of India is migrating all urban cooperative banks towards a common regulation, including the BR Act amendment. And when we talk of comparing the growth rate, comparing every other parameter with that of a commercial bank with a vis-a-vis urban cooperative bank, my view is that you can compare apple to apple. You can have comparison with apple to apple. Any comparison with the commercial bank of that of the urban cooperative banks as a group also will give you diametrically opposite opinions and diametrically opposite numbers, whether it is growth, whether it is branch reach, or whatever, whether it is technology, whether it is business growth. Commercial banks have a distinct advantage of being bankers to the various governments as also. In many centers, the State Bank of India represents Reserve Bank of India, and many other commercial banks also work on behalf of Reserve Bank of India in various states, wherever State Bank of India is not there. But wherever State Bank of India has got a greater role to play the advices or play the rules issued by the Reserve Bank of India. And why these commercial banks are huge in size, why the percentage of urban cooperative banks is hardly 3 or 4%, although it is around 9 lakh crore. Why it is low? One of the fundamental thing which I believe is the government business. The central government and various state governments park their money or use the money which is granted to them via various budgetary allocations through public sector banks and not through the urban cooperative banks. Here itself, the growth becomes incomparable because these government funds are kept in a current account with this public sector bank. The urban cooperative banks do not have any choice to get this money, no way to get the money. Even if you are a scheduled bank, scheduled status doesn't give you much of an advantage except a nomenclature which protects the bank. Now, if you want to compare the growth of urban cooperative banks, to me, the growth of urban cooperative banks has been stifled for several reasons. There has been no bank or branch licensing for the last almost a decade or so. Recently, it has been opened up. The growth has been stifled. Urban cooperative banks' growth has been stifled virtually through the regulations like the concentration risk norm, the priority sector norms, and various other restrictions. The commercial banks do not have any difficulty in raising the capital either from the market or getting a budgetary allocation from Government of India. For urban cooperative banks, they have to depend on their member and there are restrictions. And therefore, if a urban cooperative bank goes for any credit rating assessment from any credit rating agency, one of the major factor which hinders the assessment of the credit rating of any deposit scheme of any bank is the capability of raising the capital. Now, when we are talking of comparative growth with a vis-a-vis Reserve Bank of India, there can be a number-wise comparison wherein we are always, the urban cooperative banks are always falling short in the numbers in terms of percentage also. If the public sector banks have grown at the rate of 16-17%, the urban cooperative banks hardly 3 or 4% growth is there. This is principally because of the limitations of growth, limited opportunities, and despite the BR Act amendment regulation, I still feel that the level playing field has not been granted. I'll quote a simple example why I am not in a position to compare the commercial bank with the urban cooperative banks. Commercial banks continue to have a priority sector target of 40%, and the urban cooperative banks have to reach a target of 75% by 2026. I just do not know if the Government of India says that all the regulations of the commercial banks should be applied to the urban cooperative banks, but it is being done in bits and pieces. I understand that it cannot be done at a stroke of pen at one particular time or at one particular day. It has to be a gradual process. Now, this gradual process has created problem for the Reserve Bank of India. What is the problem that is created? The problem is that they are suddenly applying the commercial banks guidelines to urban cooperative banks overnight. How the urban cooperative banks will comply with these norms where there was a separate regulation? When you try to compare the growth of commercial banks with the urban cooperative banks, this basic difference has to be taken into consideration. Growth is only a percentage number. Probably a comparative growth, sorry, I'm coughing. But then the comparative growth is possible only when you are on par on all terms. Currently, you are not. Currently, you are not. For example, you find the last year's all regulatory guidelines that you will find a huge confusion in the regulatory instructions itself, because they are issuing circulars for all regulatory entities and they are referring back to all earlier circulars which were never applicable to urban cooperative banks. Why nobody is paying attention to that is a question, because the transition has to be managed smoothly. That seems to be not happening. So sorry, my friend who has asked me to do a video on comparative growth story. It seems to be very difficult because of incomparable factors which exist in the sector. If you look at the entire portfolio of urban cooperative banking sectors, roughly around 6 lakh crores assets are there. I have pittance. They are pittance if you compare that with the commercial banks data. Commercial banks data is huge and they have advantage of scales. For us, the 1400 banks, 1400 odd banks which are existing in country, In limited pockets of 11 states, no union territory is having a primary urban cooperative bank. Now, with these geographical restrictions on expansion, right from the day one, there has been restrictions on growth. Commercial, as far as the urban cooperative banks are concerned, the Reserve Bank of India has always issued restrictive guidelines because they know that the members of the board are not professional. And these members of the board are paying with the money of depositors. And therefore, these are restrictive instructions where the growth is restricted. My conclusion for the entire story is that you will grow provided RBI allows you to grow. Second part that comes into play is to what extent the board of Urban Cooperative Bank is professional. Because that's the approach. If the board is professional, growth is not an issue. You look at almost 80 to 90 banks doing fantastic growth. Fantastic, almost double digit growth. They are doing good. But their growth is stifled for several reasons. You look at the concentration risk circular, which is not applicable to commercial banks, but for urban cooperative banks, they have restrictions. So despite having a opportunity, they cannot do that. And the guidelines which are typically negative in nature. For example, if I give a housing loan, I have to consider that loan into CRE category within the 15% norm. Why is that? There is a quantum which is considered in the private sector, say the amount up to 35 lakhs. Why this quantum is not excluded from the computation of CRE? Because you get still real estate is a good business, and because of the RERA and other such regulations, you will find that the CRE loans are rarely defaulting. Over a period of time, the numbers of the urban cooperative banks are also growing. Growing in what sense? The gross NPAs are down, the net NPAs are down. You go to RBI website, you will get all the numbers of urban cooperative banks that I will not share with you. My only worry, my only argument for the comparison is that you cannot do a comparison, because that comparison will have to have a lot of logics which are indefensible, and therefore I believe that let's not compare ourselves with the commercial bank. Let's compare ourselves with ourselves. Where we were last year and where we are this year, and what has gone wrong or what has gone right, which can be persisted upon. That's how the growth can be increased and encouraged. Everybody is trying to ensure that they participate in the growth story of India. If you like my views, please subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, comment, raise questions. My email is given here. You can always write me any query that you feel. I'll be able to respond to it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much.